Welcome back, everyone. Welcome here in the studio, Ambassador Mohammed Anis Salim, member of the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs. Thank you very much for coming in tonight. And let me start off, Your Excellency, by asking you about how you view the alarmingly or the growing threat of Daesh, if you will, which is growing at an alarming rate on both a regional and international scale.
Daesh is a byproduct of a number of phenomena globally and regionally.
Right.
One is the whole growth of Al-Qaeda coming out of the Afghanistan war, and then its spillover into the Middle East. And then the split within Al-Qaeda that actually saw the birth of ISIS or what we call Daesh in the Arabic lexicon. What has happened here is that Daesh has feeded on a number of things, systemic things that have happened. One is, of course, the war in Iraq 2003.
Right.
And with that, we see the beginning of a series of collapses in Arab states. That Arab states, the ability of the Arab state to force a certain order internally, to monopolize force, to maintain at least an absence of violence, open violence, that was broken.
Right.
And we saw with the collapse of states that these non-state actors became big players on the regional scene. So we have this phenomena coming very strongly. At the same time, the regional system of states, basically the Arab League, had not developed the tools to face these kind of threats. They were still looking at the old world, the world of states, of the Security Council, of the United Nations, of big powers. They did not see this threat coming over the horizon of the non-state actor that would threaten the monopoly of force by states. So we have a complex phenomena. They are not only that when Daesh became a major threat, taking over huge parts of Iraq in basically after end of 2013, 2014, towards and then up to the summer of 2014, the reaction of the Arab world, both individually as states, but also as a regional organization, was very late.
Right.
And that also tells you something about the weakness and the capacity, the resilience of the region in terms of its ability to face these new threats.
Right. And do you see Daesh, though, as the only threat to regional stability and security?
Not at all. You have Daesh is represents one set of threats.
Right.
You have another set of threats related to the identities of states in the region. That you have a lot of new identities, or perhaps nascent or peripheral identities, emerging and demanding independence. We saw this starting with South Sudan, the separation of South Sudan. We see it very strongly with the Kurdish movement. People are predicting that there will be a Kurdish state within the next 5 years. We see it very much in a lot of the other identities. We see it in what President Obama is talking about now. When he talks about the region, he talks about Sunni states and he talks about Shia states. He talks about the major conflict in the region being Sunni-Shia. These are very new ideas, and it represents a challenge really to the traditional Arab way of looking at the region and perceiving its security.
But do you see it as part of a conspiracy theory, as some theorists or as some analysts view it? They view this as part of dividing the region into smaller states that would be more easy to influence and more easy, obviously, to manipulate.
The problem with conspiracy theories in general is that you have a dynamic where you are removed as an actor. You are a spectator. It turns you into a spectator. And it takes responsibility away from you for your own fate. And it also disarms you in the sense you have no ability to do anything about the future. That's the problem with apart from that, the logic of it in terms of finding a basis in fact is very difficult. You know, all of this is a whole process of really running away from reality.
Right.
So I think the problem with what we need is a much more thorough analysis of the problems. We have to be very honest with ourselves about some of these problems. Some of these problems have been sitting there for ages. Nobody wanted to take care of them.
Right.
And now they're exploding, and people don't have the tools because they didn't start preparing early enough.
Right.
I think what's needed now is to stop and say, we need to analyze what's happening. What are the root causes of this? And how can we re-equip ourselves to take responsibility and to start changing our systems to deal with these threats?
Well, if I were to ask you to answer those questions yourselves, what would
well,
you
we
say?
need to be here all night.
Right.
but one key thing is to think in terms of a new regional order, that there is a new Middle East that is emerging, and it requires a new way of thinking. One of the aspects of this is that you need to think of a way in which you will deal with the Middle East states, not the Arab states. Thinking of the regional order as an order for Arab states exclusively has a problem because you have never thought of how you're going to integrate non-Arab states in the region. The second tier of activities is, what do you do with the groups that are not Arab and Sunni? How do you create space for a predominantly Arab identity that is enriched and is allowing space for other identities and other expressions? This is a very important thing to try to maintain the integrity. And the third thing is, how do you create a security system that can deal with the new threats? Because the new threats are not the old ones where you were thinking about big states trying to invade or to occupy or to create military bases. It's much more about your ability to create jobs and to create a future for young people and to avoid the huge differentials that exist now between some of the richest countries in the world and some of the poorest countries of the world, and we put them together and we say, okay, now you work together. Now you talk about joint security. Now you talk about a joint military force.
Right.
How can you really realistically talk about these things if you have states that really are very, very different from each other?
Right. So let me start, obviously go back to this other major threat, which is perhaps more obvious, if you will, and that is the threat of terrorism in the region, which has obviously brought Iraq to Syria to its knees, perhaps Iraq, perhaps fearing it could return back to or go to that fate. And we can only blame a group like Daesh for what's happening right now, or do we blame the governments as well for how they're handling the situation, especially when we're looking at Iraq? I mean, today we saw the Iraqi Prime Minister suggest that a number of high posts, including the Deputy Prime Minister, the Vice Presidency, be eliminated to confront what he said was corruption within the ranks.
This goes to the heart of the kind of understanding of the kind of threats that the region faces now.
Yeah.
One is that the region was behind the curve when it came to reform ideas. As we turned into the 21st century, there were a lot of proposals on reforming the region, that the time had come to democratize, to modernize decision-making, to deal with issues that had come from the wave of wealth that came in the after 1973, that something needed to change. The regimes in the region resisted this call and delayed the process of change. When the wave of change later, it was violent, it was without an ideology, without leaders, and to a large extent, this is the sad story of the Arab Spring, that the Arab Spring came with very fine ideas, but failed when it came into finding a mechanism to translate this into a sustained process of change. So you have this delayed process and of course that creates frustrations and creates opportunities for terrorist organizations to occupy the space where anger is developing, unemployment, lack of ideology, lack of vision towards the future. You need to have a vision about how you're going to transfer this part of the world to join the 21st century.
Right.
And when you don't have this vision and you don't have the leaders who are willing to take it there, then you create space for the terrorist organizations, especially because
So they're all really interconnected, aren't they?
they are, absolutely.
Right.
And especially because the terrorist organization in this model comes with an ideology. And the ideology comes, when you go close to it, it's related to a reinterpretation of Islam that is extremely reactionary, extremely violent, and really doesn't respect any norms, whether they be international norms or even Islamic norms.
You mentioned that, but again, one wonders, why do youths, for example, in the West find this sort of ideology also attractive? And hence we're seeing sleeper cells, we're seeing youths joining the ranks of Daesh in Syria and Iraq. What makes it appealing to them, do you think?
There is no simple explanation for this, and you have to look at it very closely. You have to look at the migrant communities in the West. The West had absorbed a set of migrants. They are small percentages, but in numbers they are large. And these communities were not fully integrated into their societies. When you talk about the Algerians in France, for example, and you're talking about 5-6 million people. It's a whole country. It's double the size of some of the countries in the Arab world. So the failure of integrating these people into their societies, and the impact, the ideological impact of the recruiting forces, that's a very strong element. The appeal of adventurism, the appeal of doing something outside the box, that also can be very attractive for young people. There can be financial reasons also. There are many reasons for this. So it's a complicated thing, but I agree. It is an unusual phenomenon because we normally assume that people living in a high-income society with a stable future will desist from joining terrorism. But these are all failures in terms of the systems, the international systems for dealing with terrorism also.
Well, if you will, they sort of repeat themselves in both the Middle Eastern societies and in Western societies. And perhaps they pose the question of how important it is to deal with terrorism, or this phenomenon as well, of us and the other, if you will, in a collective form, not just each country going about it by itself.
Well, there is a lot of space for improving the reaction to terrorism. And many countries have been asking, Egypt has been talking about this for a very long time. At many times, people were not willing to listen. The idea of defining terrorism, the idea of international action, the idea of looking at the ideology behind terrorism, these are all ideas. If we look over the last 20 years or so, we'll find that Egypt consistently has been alert to this, and we've been trying to address it. The results have not been always 100%, but I think there is a lot of room for improving the international coordination and international action on fighting terrorism.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Mohammed Anis Salim, member of the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs, for your time and for your insights. Ladies and gentlemen, a quick break with another report that we have